So it begins. There are several reports saying that Russia is bombing territories under Ukrainian flags to create provocation. Putin might invoke martial law and mobilization in bordering regions. Russian fleet in the Black Sea prepares for the massive missile launch. All this definitely looks like Russia is getting ready for one more and potentially even final push. Which territories in Ukraine is Russia targeting? Why this can be a final push? And are there any potential deadlines when Russia wants to achieve its goals? And these are the questions that we'll be talking about in today's video. What's up, investors? Sarge714 and people of Reddit, it's the Russian Dude, and this is your daily update on Russian-Ukrainian war as of Tuesday, June 21st. You can see the main events of the day to my right, along with the timestamps. Okay, so right now I have so many evidence that Russia is probably getting ready for its one final push, and right now I'll be using the map of the war and explaining, supporting my arguments. And so first of all, we obviously have to talk about the main battle of this war at this very moment, which is the battle for the city of Severodonetsk. The main attacks of Russian forces as always come from the north of this city, but recently Russia attempted to advance from the southeast of this city, specifically against the cities of Sirotino and Belaya Gora. Both of these attacks were resisted by Ukrainian army. One of the main roads that Ukraine is using to bring supplies to the city of Severodonetsk is the road between the cities of Bakhmut and Lysychansk. And one of the main priorities of Russia at this very moment is to destroy this road and to disrupt the supplies to the Ukrainian army. Russia is slowly but kinda surely advancing in this region. That is why it is estimated that Russia might take the city of the Severodonetsk in the next couple of weeks. Another reports say that Russian army was able to capture the small town of Tashkovka, which is to the south of the city of Lysychansk. And Lysychansk at this very moment is the city which is under the control of Ukrainian army. And it is almost certain that Russia will be using their new acquired location to attack the city of Lysychansk from the south. In addition to that, the city of Lysychansk is under constant artillery strikes by Russian army, and the majority of these artillery strikes come from the city of Severodonetsk. Now let's get some good news and go down to the south of Ukraine. As you might remember, Russia at this very moment is controlling the city of Kherson, and for the last week Ukrainians were actively counter-attacking this city, and yesterday it was even reported that Ukrainians were able to breach the first line of defense, which means that at this very moment Russia is actively reinforcing its positions and creating second and third lines of defense. And today the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, Irina Vereshchuk, made a statement that Ukrainians must evacuate from Kherson region. And the reason for this, it is because Ukraine is getting ready to completely retake this city. That is why it is expected that major battles will happen in the nearest future. She urges the population of Kherson region to evacuate as soon as possible, even if it means going through the occupied Crimea. Because it is assumed that as soon as Russia realizes that they are losing the city of Kherson, they might just destroy it while retreating. There are also several reports that at this very moment Russia has several of its missile cruisers in the Black Sea on active duty, which basically means that these ships will be used to launch several missile attacks against Ukrainian territories, but more about this in a couple of minutes. But now let's get back to the most important region where the majority of battle actions are happening, the east of Ukraine. For the last couple of days, Russia has been actively bombing the city of Kharkov. In response to that, Ukrainians were obviously also launching several artillery strikes. All of this is happening dangerously close to the borders with Russia, which according to some media agencies means that in case these attacks continue, Putin will be forced to call for a martial law in the bordering regions. And in addition to that, he might call for a mandatory mobilization in these regions. In addition to that, some of you might already know that the region of Donetsk is under the control of Russian army. But for the last couple of days, there have been several reports that Ukrainians are bombing this region. With only one big and major difference is that these are potentially Russian forces who are using Ukrainian vehicles and Ukrainian flags to do this. And the question here is, why would Russia bomb its own territories? And while the answer is pretty sad, it is just to make a provocation. The reason why would these potentially Russian forces do this under Ukrainian flags is to create this awareness is that Ukraine is attacking Russian territories. And because of this, at least the Russian government hopes is that this will allow them to continue its military actions in Ukraine. According to some civilians that live in Donetsk region, the time between they hear that the missile was launched and between the explosion is very short, which allows them to assume that these missiles are being launched not that far from the explosion site. And as you remember, the majority of Donetsk region is under Russian control. And so Russia obviously immediately blames Ukraine for these attacks. But the response of Ukrainian side is that it does not make sense at this very moment for Ukraine to retake this region. And the reason for this it is because they do not have enough ammunition to open a new front. And in addition to that, why would they destroy their own city, which according to them they will inevitably take back? And finally, according to sources from the Ministry of Defense of Russia, it is estimated that Russia is planning to take control over the entire Luhansk region before or on June 26th, which is relatively confirmed by all this increased activity of Russia in this region. So what do we have right now? What makes me claim that Russia is potentially getting ready for this one last final push? First of all, we have this constant artillery strikes in the region of Kharkov, which is dangerously close to the borders with Russia. And because of this, Putin might announce the martial law on mobilization, which will increase the number of soldiers in the army. Second, Russia is putting the majority of its forces into the capturing the city of Severodonetsk. And looks like, in case the situation goes the same way it does at this very moment, Russia might be successful within the next couple of weeks. Third is that allegedly Russia is bombing its territories in Ukraine under Ukrainian flags. And because of this, it creates the provocation, which will only justify its further invasion into Ukraine. And finally, we have this fleet of Russian ships in the Black Sea, which are basically on standby. And it is estimated that these ships might send its missiles not just to the south of Ukraine, but including to some decision-making cities such as Kiev. And all of this, in my own personal understanding, creates this kind of perfect storm, which allows me to think is that Russia is getting ready for this one final push very soon. Welcome to another episode of Ridiculous Russian Propaganda. And today we have this statement by the Minister of Culture of Russia, Olga Lyubimova, who is saying that it is Russian cinemas who are to blame, that Russian people are no longer going to cinemas as much. For those of you who might not know this, here is a quick backstory. Since the beginning of March, Russian cinemas stopped showing Western movies. And those cinemas which were still kinda illegally showing these Western movies, they were replacing the original names with like Russian names. For example, one of the most recent movies, Batman, the name of this movie Russians replaced with Flying Bat. But anyways, Russian people obviously they liked Western movies, and as soon as there was so big decrease in Western movies offered, the number of people going to the cinemas obviously also decreased. The only movies that were shown in Russian cinemas were Russian movies, and later they even added TV shows. And even though some of these movies and TV shows are actually not that bad, the majority of them are quite awful. And so yes, long story short, even though cinemas are now open in Russia, there is almost nothing to see. And once again, like mentioned previously, Olga Lyubimova, who is the Minister of Culture of Russia, she said that these are the Russian cinemas to blame for such decreased number of people. What she basically means is that Russian cinemas shouldn't have shown these Western movies in the first place. And the reason for this, it is because people got used to high quality movies. And now, once they got exposed to something good, it will be very difficult to go back. So to rephrase your statement, it is basically your own fault that you set such high standards and now people just don't want to see your movies anymore. The advisor to the president of Ukraine, Alexei Arestovich, warned all the Ukrainians that they should be extremely careful in the next couple of days. And besides that, they should never ignore air sirens and go to the bomb shelters as soon as possible. Because according to his intelligence, Russian Navy in the Black Sea is getting ready to do a missile strikes against Ukrainian territories. The reason why these Russian ships are in this so-called combat status is because previously Ukrainians were attacking the Snake Island. And in addition to that, Ukrainians were able to destroy Russian oil drilling stations in the Black Sea. And because of this, several Russian politicians acknowledged that this was the attack against the territory of Russia, which basically means, at least according to them, that right now Russia is free to use force against decision-making cities. And because of this, according to Alexei Arestovich, Russia might use these missile strikes against cities such as, for example, Kiev. But he obviously doesn't know the exact areas where Russians are planning to launch their missiles, which basically means that theoretically Russia can attack almost any city they want in Ukraine. Which is just once again another confirmation that Russia is probably getting ready for this one last final push. On this graph we can see how much weapons different countries pledged to Ukraine and how many of these weapons are already delivered. The lines which are in light red color are the weapons that were promised to Ukraine, and the lines that are in dark red color are the weapons that are already delivered to Ukraine. And as you can see, the biggest contributor to Ukraine is the country of the United States of America. But at this very moment, only a little bit less than half of the weapons were delivered. The second biggest contributor is the country of Poland, which delivered all the weapons which it promised. The third biggest contributor is the country of the United Kingdom, which already delivered almost all of its promised weapons. Russian infiltrator in Kherson region Kirill Stremausov says that the region must do a referendum about joining Russia as soon as possible, preferably this fall. And most likely the reason for this urgency it is because the government of Russia understands that the region of Kherson is getting very close to be retaken back by Ukrainians. So what they are trying to do here is to separate this region from Ukraine and kinda attach it to Russia, which later they will be using this thing as an argument that Ukraine is invading Russian territories. And I mean, of course, no one will believe them except probably Russia itself and like Belarus, but this is what they're trying to do, which is basically exactly the same thing that is happening right now with Crimea. No one basically except Russia in the world recognizes this as a part of Russian territory. But in case Ukrainian army will be attacking Crimean Peninsula, Russia will immediately say that this is the attacks against the territory of Russia, which will allow them to continue pressuring Ukraine even further. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, says that the world leaders must never go easy on Putin. What Boris Johnson basically means is that Putin will go unpunished. This will only show the world that you can do things like this and basically nothing will happen. He then also indirectly refers to the events that happened in Crimea in 2014. When Russia basically annexed the peninsula. At that moment, almost every political leader of the world was against Russia taking the Crimea, but then eventually everyone just calmed down. And because of this, 8 years later, this peninsula is still the conflict territory between Russia and Ukraine. Russia is actively recognizing this peninsula as a part of their own territory, which basically means if Ukraine attacks Crimea, Russia will have to respond. And this is exactly what Boris Johnson wants to prevent. He says that if sanctions and counteractions against Russia because they annexed Crimea were harder than they are right now, probably this would never happen. But because political leaders went easy on Putin, this probably created the situation that we are right now in this very moment. Putin basically felt that he can do such things unpunished, and that is why he invaded the east of Ukraine as well. The head of Independent Republic of Donetsk, Denis Pushilin, signed a law under which this region can now officially hire soldiers into its army from different countries. These soldiers will be serving in the army under a contract, which technically makes them mercenaries. And by the way, I'm sure that most of you already know this, but at this very moment, 3 mercenaries that are fighting against Russia are awaiting death sentences. The main justification of Denis Pushilin himself was that these people were from different countries who are doing terroristic activities against Russia. And that is why these people are considered to be mercenaries, and that's why they deserve death. And now he literally does the same thing. So it's like if mercenaries fighting against Russia, it's illegal. But if mercenaries are fighting supporting Russia, this is perfectly good. And this is your Russian level of double standards. And by the way, if you like this style of daily news reporting, feel free to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, please make sure to check the link in the description if you wish to support Ukraine with us. You will get some additional content and all the proceeds will be donated to Ukraine at the end of each month. Thank you so much for your attention. Check the link in the description. Stay safe and see you tomorrow.